Hello, my name is Tom Hogan. This is my partner in crime, Matt Eisenhammer. Wave hi to everybody. Matt and I are lifelong baseball fans, and we have found the baseball off-season period from November to March to be the least interesting part of the calendar in a given year. We miss baseball every winter, and in 2015 we decided to do something about it. That was when we made the fateful decision to start playing out of the park baseball. We started an online league, played season after season of out of the park baseball. In the last 5 years, I would estimate we've played 30 seasons of out of the park baseball. Now, fast forward to 2020. We're sitting here tonight on June 10th, and we still have no baseball. Major League Baseball should have 2 months worth of games completed at this point. And just as an aside, we both vividly remember the strike of 94-95. We were both teenagers, fresh in our memories. Watching how the negotiations have gone between the players and owners this year, and recalling the issues that led to the strike, I think I speak for both of us when I say we are pessimistic about seeing Major League Baseball games this year. Thus, we have embarked on a new project, Replacement Player League Baseball. The name is fitting because the owners actually tried briefly to run out replacement players in spring training of 1995. We are going to use Out of the Park 21 software to simulate the 2020 baseball season. The games will be broadcast on this YouTube channel, with myself acting as play-by-play announcer and Matt acting as general manager and decision-making power behind the Chicago Cubs. Our hope is by recording games and making them available for others to watch, we'll be able to provide some entertainment to anyone else who is missing baseball in their lives. So, let's take a moment and lay out the format for what we're trying to do. The mechanics of it. We have a YouTube channel. Every day that a game is posted, it will be at 1 p.m. Central, just like Cubs games on WGN. There is a website which acts as a newspaper for the league, and there's a link. If you look in the lower right corner of the YouTube banner, you can click on that link and you can follow it to the newspaper. We're going to do daily updates there as much as possible. Not necessarily every single day, but when we don't do it every single day, we'll still catch up and fill in the gaps when we do run updates. We are going to do periodic Monday morning with Matt segments. Wave hi again. We're going to discuss the team's progress throughout the season, any transactions that happen to occur with the team or with other teams in the division as well. Now, let's discuss a little bit of the nuts and bolts behind what we are trying to do and the rules we will be governed by. We are starting on opening day of 2020. And we are using the 2020 schedule as it was intended and written last fall. Major League Baseball plays 162 games in 185 days. We are going to attempt something similar, playing 162 games in 180 days. And our target for completing this season is going to be December 6th. If there are playoff games, we'll broadcast them in December and wrap the whole thing up by Christmas. In 2020, Major League Baseball had some rule changes that they intended to implement if this season ever actually takes place. So, Matt, this is where I'm going to kick it over to you. The first rule change is the change to a 26-man roster for the regular season. So, as the general manager, how does having an extra player on your team affect your decision-making?
Well, I think the intent of the rule change was to make up for the fact that there were going to be changes around how often you could take a relief pitcher and bring him into the game. You may go elaborate into that. But that idea was carrying an extra man on the roster, I believe, to alleviate some of that. I think that obviously for the National League, which has no designated hitter, you could potentially carry another bat, or you could decide you want to run through pitching in a quicker method than you otherwise would. And so I think it really comes up to your team makeup.
So you make up two grade points there. First of which is, even in this shortened season that Major League Baseball is talking about, there's talk of implementing the designated hitter in the National League. And so that might be something that we address in the future. And you actually segue into the second rule change I was going to bring up, which is the 3-batter rule for pitchers. Now, this applies to all pitchers, but theoretically your starter should face a whole lot more than 3 batters. This is a rule that is really intended for relief pitchers. And what do you feel like is the effect of that rule on the game of baseball?
Well, I mean, you only have to look at how Joe Madden was running the Cubs, right? He could throw 3 different guys in an inning, right? Each for a batter. And so you started to see all sorts of crazy new things in baseball. You started to see the term of an opener, where Tampa Bay was running out relievers to start a game. Or you'd have people who were literally designed to just throw to a left-handed or right-handed batter, and that's it. So you allowed a lot of specialty sort of positions, and you saw all kinds of crazy things that Joe did with throwing relievers out in the outfield when needed. So I think it will change some things there, and it'll be interesting to see how managers adjust.
It would be very interesting to find out how Joe Madden would react to that, or how Major League Baseball would react to it, for instance, if Madden decided that, well, my reliever's going to face 3 batters, but it might not be 3 batters in a row. What do you think of that? And how would Rob Manfred necessarily... Yeah, how would Major League Baseball apply the rules in that situation? So it's a great question. And
who was it? It was Wood.
Travis Wood?
Travis Wood was out in the outfield catching a ball against the ivy.
Oh, yeah, he had his back to the wall catching a fly ball because the batter didn't hit it to the actual outfielder like they expected. And it does harken back a little bit to the guys, the Tony La Russa's, for instance, with the Athletics, where he kind of invented the loogie, the lefty one-out guy. And that sort of strategy's been going on for decades, but it certainly has accelerated in recent years. All right, so now, specific to our game, Matt is acting as the general manager of the Cubs. However, David Ross, as represented by the game AI, will actually be making decisions in the course of the game. So one of the things that we might end up discussing at some point is looking at David Ross's decision-making, how the game is utilizing the players that you have provided for the team to use in certain situations. So that's...
Yeah, I think that's one of the most exciting things about out of the park baseball. It's got a pretty strong artificial intelligence, and I think you'll see that the different managers manage different ways. The different general managers have different opinions about how they value veterans versus prospects, and how willing they are to trade and make decisions. And then also it's got a very robust financial piece where financial decisions really play into how the game mechanics work.
Yes. And so that brings us to our second point. We have the owner goals active in this game. And so one of the things that we look at is what direction is ownership giving for the future of the team. Do you want to run down what the owner goals are quickly in this particular version of the game that we're playing? Do you have them handy?
I don't have them up, but I remember them for the most part. So one of those goals is the Ricketts family definitely wants me to extend Anthony Rizzo
Yes.
to a long-term contract. And so that'll be an interesting question. I think he's going to want something like $30 million a year. And there is no shortage of expensive contracts on the Cubs.
Yes.
And that'll be interesting to see how that goes. They're topped out over $200 million. A second goal will definitely be to make the playoffs. They feel very strongly about the Cubs' return after getting stopped in that final week last season. And then I'm not sure if there's a third goal. I'm gonna have to look, but it's definitely those two.
I think the third goal is win the championship, and I think it gave it a 5-year time frame.
Yeah, I think I have 5 years to win another World Series, so I got to be
Right.
under 8.
Yep. Now, we're going to come back a little bit later to one of those goals. So we'll just hang on to that idea of making the playoffs here for a little bit. We're going to come back to that. The next thing specific to our game, I will be the one announcing the games, doing play-by-play and color commentary. So that's kind of my role in what we're trying to put together here. And, hopefully people can actually fathom listening to me on a consistent basis. We'll see how this goes. The next thing, and this is an artificial limitation that we're placing on ourselves, but it is based in reality. We're going to allow 5 trades in a calendar year for you to be able to execute as the general manager of the Cubs. And in doing some research, what I've discovered is that teams execute about 4.5 trades every year. Some teams do more, some teams do less. Teams that are rebuilding do tend to pull more trades during the course of a season. But sometimes teams that are winning will go to the trade deadline and make 3 deals on July 31st also. So that's something that it's artificial, but we're putting it in place to try to simulate some realism within the game structure.
Otherwise, the game really turns into kind of a stock market sort of entity where you're buying low and selling high, and you can turn around a team pretty quickly, but you might make 15 deals, and it's just not very realistic.
Right, because at a certain point, if you make that many trades, the other GMs are going to start to say, hey, what's going on over here in Chicago? And you'd get ostracized to a degree.
Oh, yeah, and it would impact who would sign with you because they don't want to be moved.
Mm-hmm. So you definitely have to have some kind of token mechanic for stability within the team. Yes.
We do also limit, much like Major League Baseball, you can't trade a free agent acquisition until after, June 2nd?
June 1st, yeah. June 1st, June 2nd, whatever it is. Yes, if you make a free agent signing. There's no sign and trades, such as with the NBA, would be one example. When we're simulating the games, they're going to be done in one pitch mode. And I have done some dry runs with this. It takes about 40 to 45, maybe 50 minutes on the high side to get through a game in one pitch mode. Now, the way I see it is a lot of people would be looking at this as a baseball game as a 3.5 hour time commitment. We're going to knock it out in 45 minutes, and we're going to give you all the meat and potatoes, all the action, and not have to worry about how many foul balls that Jason Hayward hit into the right field seats.
I think that's giving him a lot of credit.
Well, it is. But other than that, the settings for Out of the Park 21 are all just default. Everything else is basically being left alone. We have the Major League Baseball, and we have the independent leagues represented. We have the Cuban League, the Mexican League, the Nippon League in Japan, and the Korean League. And players can actually jump back and forth from one league to another and move around as they see fit. So you could have, free agent Jay Bruce decide to go over and knock 45 home runs in Japan for a season and look like a monster. It's a realistic thing. There will not be an international amateur or posting system. We represent that simply by having the scouts generate a certain number of scouting discoveries during the course of the season. We're also not going to simulate the World Cup of Baseball, which was scheduled to happen this year and was also canceled. So, why do we care enough to take on what is quite honestly a monumental undertaking? Why do we care so much about baseball that we want this to happen, and we're willing to literally commit hours of time into making this work? Do you want to try to answer that first?
Well, as a Chicago kid and a Cub fan who goes back to my great grandfather, um, it just gets in your blood, right? It's part of family lore, much like some people are Irish or grew up on the north side or whatever it is. This has just been in our blood for years, and so life just doesn't seem right if there isn't some Cub baseball going on. And this is not that, but hopefully it's a distraction to what people are facing on a day-to-day basis with virtually no sports.
Yeah.
And I really like the day-to-day element, and I think from a young age when you start to see things like I remember Mel Rojas blowing probably a 4-run lead in the ninth inning after the Cubs were on a 7-game winning streak after a disastrous start to the season, and it kind of derailed the team after that moment. You're sitting there thinking, I can handle this better than the Chicago GM. This is not someone who should be pitching for the Chicago Cubs. And I may not know what I'm talking about, but it's certainly kind of how you grow up, questioning the moves of a manager or a general manager. And I think there's some fun in getting to kind of show, as limited as this is, that kind of ability. And I think it's exciting.
Well, and there's a couple of even better examples than that, in my opinion. I don't know how much of this is urban legend and how much of it is reality, but the 1992 offseason has always stuck out to me, where Greg Maddux was allowed to go and shop himself as a free agent, and then he came back to the Cubs and said, hey, what's this going to take? And he was told, oh, we already spent your money on Mike Morgan and Jose Guzman, so go ahead and sign with the Braves. It's fine. Don't worry about us. We're good. And that was something that always kind of struck me as a bizarre decision-making process.
The end of Andre Dawson, too.
It was. It's true. Another one that the 2000 season, you and I went up to a game in Milwaukee, and during the 2000 season, the Cubs had something like a 15-game winning streak. And we saw either game number 13 or game number 14 of that streak, whatever it was. But during the course of that season, the Cubs had this winning streak. They got into the wild card chase, kind of to defy expectations a bit. And they determined that they needed a left-handed bat that could play first base. And, funny enough, they ended up trading for Fred McGriff. But the guy that they had allowed to leave was Mark Grace, who had literally just left the previous offseason because the Cubs said they didn't need him. And then they, at the trade deadline, had to turn around and trade for a facsimile, a knockoff of Mark Grace, I suppose. And so you and I both looked at these decisions and thought to ourselves, this is nonsensical. It borders on irrational, frankly. So would you like to talk a little bit about a conversation that you got to have with a real Cub general manager at one time on the Score?
Well, it was me calling in after Mel Rojas blew a lead, and I just questioned the logic of having someone like him. It was a disaster, along with a whole host of other things like with Troy Hawkins and all. There's a whole lineage of Cubs closers who couldn't close games, and I got the opportunity to call the Score and debate very quickly. They got rid of me pretty quick, but debate, why is this guy an answer closer? And he wasn't.
Right.
I think we got him from the Mets.
Was that during the Jim Hendry time period, or maybe it was before that?
Before Jim Hendry.
Okay. Well, that's fair. So for you and I, just to fill people in a little bit on our path through Cubdom, we were both living in Ames in 1998, and we were living on the same dorm floor. We watched the Kerry Wood game, the 20 strikeout game against Houston. It was a awesome time. Cubs actually made the wild card that year. And then, lo and behold, Kerry Wood got hurt. And over the years, Kerry Wood made a series of rehab starts in Des Moines that we ended up going to see rather than going to see him pitch in Chicago, for instance.
Yeah, it was the annual Kerry Wood rehab.
Yes, and it seemed like it. It might have been every other year, but it really did feel like it for a while. I can tell you that from my background, I grew up also with my mother and my grandparents taking me to Cubs games and watching Cubs games from a very young age. But especially for me, it was listening to them on the radio. Grew up on a farm. A lot of times we had tractors that only had AM radio on them. We had the radio in the barn because my dad was kind of a cheapskate, only had AM radio. And so I spent a lot of time listening to Ron Santo and Steve Stone and Harry Carey. Stone didn't do much radio, but Harry always made it a point to make it over to the radio side for a couple innings. And Santo was the one that really sticks out in my mind. And just listening to the way that different announcers, when you think about Santo versus Harry Carey versus Steve Stone and now Pat Hughes, and they all had their own attributes that they brought to it. Santo brought all the passion in the world. He cared desperately about what happened, and he would get not visibly upset because it was radio, but vocally upset. Yes, over the radio. And
more than upset, emotional.
Yes, I mean it kind of
character for what you would expect an announcer to do.
Certainly. And then Harry Carey, who was just 100% entertainment when he was out there. He was there because he knew that people loved listening to him, and he fed off of it and really enjoyed it. And, Steve Stone, who really brought a level of skill, expertise, knowledge that I feel like is pretty much unparalleled. Sometimes I listen to the White Sox games just to be able to hear Steve Stone once in a while when they do the Cubs and White Sox games every year. And now Pat Hughes, who is just the epitome of professionalism, just 100% technically perfect announcer every single time out. And so those are the sorts of things that I kind of aspire to. Now, let's talk about just a little bit of backstory. How exactly are we filling in the gap and saying, Matt Eisenhammer, you are now general manager of the Chicago Cubs. So take us from the final game of last season to where we're starting at the opening day, March 26th of 2020. Walk us through that a little bit.
Yeah, so I don't think this is a total stretch, right? So you finished 2019, and the Cubs have missed the playoffs. Theo has although he's won a World Series in 2016, he's made a series of long-term decisions, including Chatwood, Darvish. He's made short-term decisions, giving up players, Eloy Jimenez to get Torres. He gave up players to get Nick Castellanos, players to get who is
Quintana, Daniel Murphy, Aroldis Chapman.
Yeah, he's moved out a lot of prospects to try to keep things going. It was somewhat of a disaster in 2018 when they fell apart at the end, and again it was a disaster in 2019. And I think there were huge holes in the team in 2019 that, although they're kind of putting the blame on Maddon for focus and getting the players to really undertake their jobs in a professional manner, to me it seemed way more of the holes in those teams and the players that they brought in that didn't get it done.
Well, if I can interject here just for a moment. The end of the 2019 season was a Chernobyl level meltdown for that team. To get eliminated in the way that they did, blowing leads in consecutive games, it was a really big letdown for the end of that season too. So, sorry, go on.
No, I it's true. And so Theo was tasked with figuring out how to move some pieces around at the end of 2019. There was talk about Bryant going and blowing that up. There was talk about Contreras going and doing something there. There was talking about pitching at various times, leaving. I think moving Hayward has been a conversation. Oh, hey, we haven't even talked about Hayward's contract that feels longer than a two-term presidential.
Yes.
There's a host of things, and he didn't do anything in this offseason, right? I think the gist of it was getting Jeffers as a reliever, and Daniel Descalzo was another miss. Jason Kipnis, right? I think it's Kipnis and Jeffers who are the extent of what was brought in. And so I think what we're choosing to believe was that with concerns of the Cubs window closing, concerns that they wouldn't make the playoffs this year, and probably Theo, who's gone on record saying he didn't want to stay at a place for too long, we believe they came to a mutual decision to part ways.
All right. So you have brought in a couple of staff members to work with you on this team. You are assuming the role of VP of baseball operations, or that's what we're saying.
President of baseball operations.
Sure, whatever it is. And you have an assistant general manager working with you in the form of a man who was kind of exiled from baseball at one time, but was considered a brainchild, Paul DePodesta. And he was, has kind of a long lineage, worked under Billy Beane, went and ran the Dodgers for a couple of years, most recently working in the NFL with the Cleveland Browns, but trying to bring analytics to the NFL. And now you've reeled him back in, brought him back into Major League Baseball to work with you in Chicago.
Yeah, I think when you look at how Theo set up Ross's position, they brought in David Ross, thinking that he had the energy and the discipleship kind of mentality of growing players and getting the best out of them and challenging them to be better versions of themselves, recognizing he didn't have any experience as a manager, and getting a veteran bench coach who had major league managing experience in Andy Green.
Mm-hmm.
I liked that idea, right? And so in this perspective, bringing in Paul, but also Dombrowski, who's got a championship pedigree with the Marlins, with Detroit, and with the Red Sox, and so surrounding myself with available talent with extensive amounts of experience.
Yeah, because Dave Dombrowski was the next one and brought him in as a scouting director. He was released from the Boston organization after, if you don't finish in first place, apparently you don't get to keep running that team. So he got ushered out in the middle of September, and you brought him in. And then I know that you've got one other hiring that you're pretty proud of, if you want to share that with us.
Sure. So we've brought a new manager into South Bend. That'll be Chicago's favorite son, Kerry Wood, who will be making his managerial debut in South Bend.
Yes, A-ball. But everybody's got to start somewhere, right? So
That's what Ryan Sandberg would say.
I thought that, and I wasn't going to bring it up, but somehow, Ryan Sandberg is probably still a little salty over that. So I didn't have anything else then. I feel like we pretty well covered all the topics that we laid out. Did you have any final thoughts you wanted to share before we shut this down?
No, just excited to kick this off and hope somebody out there finds some enjoyment out of having some sort of Cub baseball to watch.
Absolutely. Replacement baseball. That is what we're marketing ourselves as.
And do you have a subscribe button on this video?
There is a subscribe button on the channel. We're not quite so technically savvy yet that we have a button on the video. Maybe next season we'll get to that.
Fair enough.
So, all right, we're going to sign off now, but we hope everyone enjoys the baseball that we are going to attempt to provide and fill that gap in people's lives.